Content carried in here is suitable for general family viewing.
Good evening. It is the 14th of May 2024. We are glad you're tuned to Law Matters, a show that is educative, informative, and offers legal aid solutions to what we face on our day-to-day lives. And tonight, we're offering nothing short of that. We'll be discussing the issue of climate change. Globally, we have seen head of states converge to talk about climate change and the devastating effects that come with climate change. Here in the country, the government has been intentional on environmental issues by putting in place national holidays for tree planting. But to what effect is that? So tonight we'll be looking into those issues and looking at the legal context of what climate change is all about. My name is Irene Mwangi. Remember, you can send in your feedback, your questions on our social media platforms at KUTV Kenya on Facebook, at KUTV Kenya on Twitter, and KUTV_Kenya on Facebook. But before we get into the nitty-gritties of this particular discussion, let me first allow my guest to introduce himself. Kindly.
Thank you so much, Irene. My name is Gibson Gisore. I'm an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. I'm equally an environmental expert and a friend of nature.
Wow, and it's
in this context.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you with us tonight to talk about the issues surrounding nature and climate change. So that we can put the discussion in context, what is climate change generally for the common mwananchi to understand? Because people have given climate change different definition. Some saying it's global warming, others saying it's the change of weather patterns. What is climate change?
Basically, what you said is everybody who has said all that is still right.
Okay.
But climate change is a scientific name, which means a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And just in a layman's language, the way we can be able to put it for somebody to understand is the effect of the earth warming up.
Okay.
When it warms up, it has a lot of side effects, which are adverse to the living organisms, including human beings who live on the earth. Part of this is change in weather patterns, which we have seen. I think it's very evident, and it's very good to have this discussion right now because we have just come out of a flooding situation. We've never had flooding for the better part of the past future, but we have seen that how it has caused a lot of chaos. Now a lot of people are homeless. So those are some of the effects of climate change. Previously, we had a very prolonged drought. Some places or parts of this country were not able to get rainfall for the last 5 years, and we lost thousands and heads of livestock and cattle, and you know how important that is to our pastoralist community. Yeah. So their wealth went down exceedingly, and it then led to people dying because if you are poor, you cannot be able to make ends meet, then you get affected at a personal level. So it also comes with other things which are not normally highlighted. The East Africa is starting to become warmer. The same climatic conditions we used to have in West, which were leading to a lot of malarias and other diseases which come with that. And you know, malaria kills. Yeah. So when we have a favorable climate which is going to enhance malaria or mosquitoes to spread malaria, then we're likely to have a lot of people dying. Yeah. So climate change does contribute to that. And then, of course, we used to the seasons for planting, which were very predictable when we were young. You know, this is the season for rain, we need to plant. This is the dry season, we need to cultivate the farms. That's no longer predictable. Okay. You can actually note for certain tell that this is going to be heavy rains, this is going to be. So we just wait and see. So I think we are in an era where we have to be very careful and invest in even modern meteorological equipments which can be able to predict the environment better. One thing which comes to mind is we need to have a satellite in space. Because we no longer cannot rely on the usual things, those things for weather patterns. I think when you did geography, there were some things where there's like a setup of some things. You're told this is a windsock, this is a meter, and this all that. So those things might not be very useful as it stands. Countries or modern nations have invested in satellites which can now be able to predict from high above the space. And in Africa, we are making a very good case for that. It's only that Kenya, we have, I think, some small one in space, but we need to invest more in a bigger one. And as Africans, we don't need to go it solo. We can agree as East Africa, we invest in one major equipment which we can be able to use, because what we can be able to see as Kenyans, you can also be able to see for that. And then we can be selling the data. We have the regional center. In Kenya, we are blessed. We have the regional center for mapping, which is here in Kasarani. They have, and they can generate a lot of data on that. So if we can be able to invest in such things, which we can be able to have a longer or a bigger view of what we are expecting in terms of weather patterns, then it can really help us in terms of planning. We could not be in the situation which we got ourselves in, where schools had to be postponed, because those are things we could have planned for and be able to do what is called mitigation, which is also part of another scientific name which is used in climate change. I think the long and short of it, that's what I can say.
All right. Now, diving into legal matters, what are the laws and regulations that surround climate change? Because it has been a term that has been used in the recent past. So are there any regulations and law in place for governing the issue surrounding climate change?
I think this is the part I say I'm proud to be a Kenyan, because I rarely use that term, because right from 2016, we were the very first country in the continent to come up with a Climate Change Act. Whether it has been able to be very useful, it's another question, but the mere effort of having that and being the leading was something which was very interesting to me, and especially that I participated in part of coming up with the parent draft, and then later there were amendments which were preferred. So we were not able to actually effect the Climate Change Act from 2016 onwards. Still recently, I think we also need to be proud of our president, because the nature of the Climate Change Act, it starts from the top, from the president, to convene those. And we have seen our president really, is the first president to call the whole of Africa to come and discuss climate change, so that we can be able to chat up path as Africans for the way forward. And we saw the ripple effect that caused in the meeting we recently had in Dubai. So that demonstrates to us that as Kenyans, we as Africans, we have a lot to do. We can do so much, and I think our president is in the right spirit. We only wish and hope that he succeeds in his endeavors, and some of the benefits can be seen as of now. Counties are now receiving money from the World Bank to do mitigation or to deal with adverse effects. I don't know how many of those have been able to harness, because part of the reason some of the counties, I understand, have not been able to tap into that kit is because they have not done the very basic thing of employing a climate change officer who will be administering the funds, who will be able to liaise with the treasury and be able to be the point person. So some counties are delaying that, and we can understand for some reason it could be that they do not have an expert, because not so many people are knowledgeable about climate change. But then we can be able to invest in taking people for courses, short-term courses, which can be able to help them so that they can be employed to tap into those funds, because it's not also good for people to suffer while the funds are there. So those are some of the things, and I think I would want to say that is one of the laws. Internationally, we have acceded to UNFCCC, which is the parent climate change coordinating framework internationally from the UN level, and Kenya is a signatory to the same, which we have actually been, which has now shaped around the world the discussions on how climate change should be handled. We had targets under the MDGs, that's Millennium Development Goals, and we had the Kyoto Protocol, which among other things came to an end in 2012. and then we had to come up with under the SDGs. Now we do have a new target which we are talking about in terms of that, the Paris climate convention, which of course now is being used as it stands.
Yeah.
And we saw some very considerable developments as Africans. We can say we have seen some considerable developments, and you see the beauty is this thing is done yearly, so you keep propagating, and the African voices has been becoming louder by the day, and I think it's going to be the loudest in the room in the next few years, and it means African issues will be listened to more, and we will be able to see countries committing towards mitigation and towards adaptation, which are some of the words which are used to mean the ways in which you can be able to avert the adverse effects which are caused by climate change.
Okay. Can you say that the Climate Change Act has been able to adversely deal with the issues surrounding climate change in the country?
At the moment, we cannot for sure say that, but by us having that particular act, it has been able to shape the discussion. It has been able to shape the structure in which we behave. The reason why I said that Kenya we are advantaged is because some other African countries are coming to come and benchmark here.
Yes.
And I mean, you take counties, for example, Makueni County under the former governor. They already had a climate change act and even regulations, which now for them, if they wanted to benefit, is just to ask for their kit and they use on their people. So those are some of the counties which we look at, and Viga County, the current governor of Viga County was also very instrumental in coming up with the act and the policy. Because he was then a member of parliament when these things were being discussed, and being a person who is knowledgeable around those areas, he really played a key role. So he has also been able to tap into that and be able to come up with a framework in his own county, which is also shaping the discussion, which I think all the counties can be able to borrow from and be able to develop guidelines on how they can be able to benefit from these kitties and the monies which are sent to Kenya for the Kenyans to benefit. So that is one of the things. Kenya is also one of the leading countries which has been able to attract a lot of funding to deal with climate because it has a framework. Now, for the rest of the African countries, I think they cannot reach 10 who are in the process of coming up with regulations and laws. That means that we have a long way. And I think the discussion which our president was able to call for at the KICC, we saw a lot of presidents come in. You know, the message they live with is that we need to do something because it's not just a trip. So we are going to see a lot of ripple effect in terms of coming up with different legislations in different countries. And also it also depends the regime which a country operates from, because they need to make something which is tailor-made. You cannot just pick a law and then apply it. You need to be able to shape it to be useful to your people. There's a lot of sensitization which needs to be done. For example, in the counties, how do you tell a local farmer that, you know, your tea plantation is being affected by climate change, and how does he benefit? How does he get this money to help him in terms of mitigation? So those are some of the discussions which need to go to the ground. Honestly, from where I sit, I think we need to start teaching climate change. The way environment, safeguarding a clean environment was being taught from primary. We need to start doing that because that is the only way to go now. Because some of these things are things which we are already experiencing them. So when people see these things, they can be able to know that already we know, because knowledge is power, information is power. Once even a young kid knows about what they are experiencing or what is happening to the environment, they're able to make better decisions.
You mentioned about Kenya taking the big step forward in terms of having a framework in place, and also some counties following suit to have their regulations and the act in place in their local assemblies. But the problem has been the implementation of the same. What can you say are the challenges of implementation of the Climate Change Act, the Mother Act, that is the one passed by the National Assembly and the Senate, as well as at the county level? What are these things hindering the implementation of the same?
The implementation is information. I mean, you'll be surprised. Even our members of parliament, I think we had a session with us, a couple of them. These people were as green as it can be. So if you're a member of parliament or somebody who sits at a higher pedestal, you expect them to have some information so that when you go to the village, you can be able to communicate the same or put structures for implementation of the same. Then you can actually know the big problem which we are facing. So we need to do a nationwide, very deliberate and targeted information dissemination to the people. We do sensitization. We have a few NGOs which are involved in such things, but the NGO environment has been affected for the past few years because they were a bit curtailed. But I mean, I'm thankful that the President recently signed the Public Benefit Act, which of course is going now to give a framework on how the NGOs are going to self-regulate. So we are hoping more NGOs are going to come into that space and be able to tap into these resources and do civic education. Because with civic education, government cannot be able to do it. Government has its role, and then there is the role for the private sector and the community-based organization. That's when this information will be able to go to the ground. Recently, there was a very interesting phenomenon which we have not had in Kenya. The Hidaya cyclone, which was about to hit our shores, but luckily it didn't quite hit with the impact which was expected. We are going to see more of those things. And how do you explain to the person in Kwale, in Lunga Lunga, that they have lived all their life? Maybe a man is 80 years and he has never heard of a cyclone, but now he's wondering, what is this current phenomenon? Has the world changed as I know it? So those are some of the things which we need to tell people, that when you hear them, this is what the effects of climate change. And this is because when you tell a man that you have to move from where you stay because the water is going to come to the size of this building, he's like, I think you're crazy. I've lived here for the longer part and I've never seen such a thing. So I think you should have taken something. So we need a lot of information to go to the ground so that when such things happen, we can be able to tell our people that that thing is coming, and then we need to invest in, as I said earlier, in weather prediction patterns, so that because some of these things happen within a very short span and you don't have enough time frame. So we need to have even our disaster management teams, because sometimes that thing hits and clears a whole town. So if you are not able to evacuate a town within a short notice of 24 hours or maybe 36 hours, then you're going to have a serious effect. So I think the whole thing, to answer your question, is really we need to do a lot of public sensitization, and that's why I was encouraging it, so that this thing can be taken to even barazas. Chiefs should be educated. We need the local administration, and then of course the children who are in school should be able to grow knowing what are we talking about, what is this climate change, so that they don't hear it as if it's an animal which lives in the forest. But so that when these things happen, you can be able to be at home with them and know we have to move because we have to save our lives.
But when you look into the specific clauses.
Oh yes, so sorry, the part of the law I didn't touch is because the law, the way it was formed, the anticipation was that it was to attract you realize that climate change is not something you can be able to do in silos. So the whole reason why even we are really pushing so hard that we have the policy in place is that it attracts the highest attention of the highest people in office. And the constitution of the board, of the people who are supposed to move things, the decision-making organs, it was involving the president. So under the former regime, the president, I think, was less interested. He never convened even one meeting. That contributed largely to the act not being felt on the ground for us who are not able to attract. And then there is a role of government. We need to do coordination of ministries, because the data has got to be picked from all departments: Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Water, Ministry of Irrigation and departments dealing with all these sectoral things which are affected. So once that data is generated, is what now becomes our KPI, Key Performance Index, which we can be able to use to gauge and even be able to champion if we're asking for money for mitigation or adaptation, that these are the adverse effects. This is how worse the situation is, so that we can be able to plan for the future. So if that coordination is not multi-agency and does not have the blessing of the president, then you might not end up doing much. So that is the challenge that particular act is suffering. But I think it's no longer going to be a problem because we have a president who is self-aware. And is really pushing for these things. Hence the reason he was able to convene an African Union. Even before our president, we need to also congratulate the Africans who have really contributed a great deal. We had the former president, the late Meles Zenawi of Ethiopia, who at one point when we were headed to the discussions around coming up of the Paris Agreement, he was the African leader for climate change, and he did a good job. He really made the African voice to stand strong. You know, some of these things are also involve international politics. So as Africans, we need to caucus and be able to speak with one voice. And unfortunately, in most cases, we have not been able to. And that's where we need to congratulate the current president because he's taken up the space. Other than Meles Zenawi, the late Meles Zenawi, the Prime Minister of the former Prime Minister of Ethiopia, President Ruto is the one person who seems to understand and have the African voice, who is pushing the agenda that now, as Africans, I think we have been left far behind for long. Nobody's hearing us. Let's unite and speak in one voice. And we saw the Nairobi meeting, how it was attended by the high and mighty. It was an African one, but it looked like an international one because that is how sensitive that thing is. So people elsewhere enjoy Africans being quiet, because they are destroying the environment on the one part, and African, which does not contribute too much. I think in Africa it's only Nigeria and South Africa which have a significant footprint which can be recognizable. The rest of us, like our grid is very green, 95%. So we are ahead of what other people should be doing. So why should we suffer? That should be the big question. Why are we suffering? It's because of the West. They're busy polluting. They're busy doing all sorts of things which are contributing to greenhouse gas emissions and making the earth warmer. So it means that the rains have got to hit us more. We need to suffer a lot of lack of rain, which leads to our people dying. So because the earth is like this table, you cannot be able to hit here and then the effects will not be felt the other side. So these people are busy doing all the wrong things here. We are on the other side receiving, on the receiving end. So the whole issue about is compensation. So we are talking about compensation. That's where we're talking about carbon trading, carbon credits, so that the companies doing this can be able to be taxed, and that money can be used to do mitigation on this other side. So that discussion has not been able to be squarely put on the table so that Africans say, how much are you contributing? They have always been avoiding that discussion. If you have been watching the climate change discussions when they happen in the COPs, there's one president, one person who comes to mind who really speaks with audacity. The Prime Minister of Barbados. She's called, I think, Mia Moore. I've forgotten the other name. When she takes to the stage, she's a lady, she just speaks her heart out, and you see the whole essence, it's not out of spite or it's not out of anything that makes her speak the way she speaks. Countries like Barbados, the small islands, the oceans are rising up. So in the near future, they will be extinct. And why will you be extinct and somebody who is supposed to be stopping this or supposed to do mitigation is not doing the same? So she's telling them, your actions are leading to our death. So can you do something about this? Can you release these funds? Because we are facing a catastrophe. But you see, the polluter, there is a principle in environmental law which called the polluter pays. That's under the framework under which we are talking about the carbon credits and carbon trading. But when we talk about pays, we need to set a framework. How much should you pay in? If you have done actions which lead to me suffering, how much we need to set the price. Okay. So once the price is set, sometimes you realize that even releasing of these funds, they put a lot of roadblocks and the things which make it almost impossible for you to access these funds. So the whole discussion now, which is on the table, is like, can you relax these laws so that people can be able to access these funds, so that at the end of the day, our people do not end up suffering for things they did not do.
Okay, we'll be getting into that discussion in a few. But looking into what is happening in the country, do you think the Climate Change Act or the environmental laws that we have in the country lead to environmental stability? We have seen the president twice now put in place a national holiday on tree planting, but some will take it as a joke, as a free day just to chill. But what are the laws in the country? What is the import of the laws in terms of environmental stability?
That's a very good question. I told you earlier that the president's heart is in the right place. But then, as a president, when you lead people, you also need to move them to the same wavelength. You cannot be too high and then you leave your people behind. But I think by him making such efforts like this National Tree Planting Days, it's really a step in the right direction, coming up with the philosophy of doing 15 billion trees. And people think that the 15 billion trees which they are talking about is, we have really devalued our forests, our flora and fauna, which we need to, and I was listening to the Minister for Environment on the tree planting day, and she was saying some giving very interesting data, that you see, we have devalued we have deforested to 38 billion have been cut, and this is in the conserved areas. So we need 38 billion. So when we talk of 15 billion, we are not even halfway. We're not even halfway of what the adverse effect we have caused to our forests. So I think it's something which, if Kenyans look at it from that perspective, we can be able to carry this thing in the same spirit and be able to, everybody, at least plant 50 trees every year, so that we try and surpass the target. And this is not something which is only happening in Kenya. Ethiopia did plant 8 billion trees in 1 week. So, of course, the population in Ethiopia is over 100 million. But then we also need to do something which is worth our size. Okay. And 15 billion is not much. Something which what we need to see from government is clear strategies. Because sometimes Kenyans need to be pushed. We need to see very clear concerted efforts. And what is the reason? Just tell to the students that before you open every term, plant 5 trees, give them a place and give them the seedlings. So that, we have like 1 million kids in school, I think in primary and in high school. So times 5, that will be quite a number. And then you go to colleges, you do the same thing. Before you even graduate, you need to demonstrate that you have grown a certain number of trees. Because it's about your future. You're not doing this for anybody. It's about your future, really, and the future of your kids, if you want to have kids. Okay. And do understand some people don't want to have kids.
But it's quite okay all the same. Thank you so much, Wakili. Yes. We'll have to take our first break, but do stay with us. We'll be back with much, much more.
Kaunti maarufu kwa kuzalisha maziwa na ukuzaji wa majani chai. Pia, serikali ya kaunti inawahimiza wakulima kukumbatia mitindo mingine ya kilimo kuzidisha mapato.
Kama kuna kikundi moja inafanya biashara ya kuuza kuku, Hao pia tumewafadhili kuwafunza jinsi ya kuhandle zile kuku kwa sababu wanaleta kwa wingi.
Haya yote tunakuletea katika Boresha Kilimo, toleo la kaunti ya Bomet.
Kilimo ni nguzo kubwa kwa ujenzi wa taifa.
Tunachimba hadi mizizi kukuletea yanayojiri.
So mimi naomba tu serikali yetu ya Mungu, ibarikiwe na Mungu, iweze kuteremsha bei ya mafuta.
Yanayokukumba tuna maizi, tunakutetea sisiri. Kwa kweli ni speciali tukikupambia makala ya mwanamke mwake. Utasema hupendi mizizi ya habari. Nami Caroline Kimoi.
Tonight we're talking about the issue of climate change in the country. Tonight we're talking about the issue of climate change in the country, of course looking into the legal mechanisms and what we are doing as a country and our connection with the global community when it comes to addressing these particular concerns. Now, before we went into a break, we were looking about the framework that is there and, congratulating Kenya for being the first country in the continent to have a legal framework in terms of climate change. But when it comes to compliance and enforcement, are we at par looking into the much work we have done in terms of legislation?
No, we are not. Unfortunately, Kenyans are very bright people, as they always say, but then the enforcement and doing the right things is where the challenge lies. I think the biggest challenge now is us to look inwards, because now whatever needs to be done has already been done. Is for us to sensitize our people so that we know what is expected. I mean, looking at the things like the Maimayu incident, we ought not to have had that. That is something which ought to have been looked into well in advance in terms of enforcement. We have our NEMA people, they ought to map the key areas, because I think after the disaster is when I saw them coming up with places, mentioning places which are prone to landslides, places where they have dams, they have even them by name, and even by characterization. So I was like, if you have all this information, and the rains have been pounding for days, I mean, these are things you give the information out there, and then people are warned in advance. And that's why I told you earlier that we need to sensitize to the lowest person, so that everybody now becomes an enforcer in his own right. Because sometimes you can tell people that you are doing something, if they do not understand, they will not do it. It will be very difficult. It's like moving a very heavy stone. But when they know the information, they will be moving by themselves. And then when they are able to see and predict the things, because after Subuki, I didn't expect that we will also lose so many Kenyans out of such a situation, out of an earth dam which collapses. So those are some of the things in enforcement. We can be able to say that as Kenyans, much as we have done the macro level development issues or coming up with the frameworks, then we need now to calm down, look inwards, do self-introspection, and be able to discuss some of be able to discuss some of these things in a micro level discussion, so that the people in the village can be able to understand. So as an earth dam, the earth dam is actually on a higher level. Maybe these rains have become too much. Can we talk to him? We see what kind of mitigations he has, so that does not affect the people downstream. So those are some of the discussions we need to start having in the village level. So if we sensitize the local administration and we sensitize the villages, then people are able to tell. They can be able to do their own policing because they live in the locality. So we'll be able to save a lot of lives. The other issue of enforcement is really the aspect of corruption, where people actually supposed to do one or two things and then they end up not doing. They just don't do it. When I'm speaking about this, I'm talking about the town setup, where we have town planning. We have now the Mathare area, the people in Kurukwa Ruben, who actually live on the river. It's not even on the river bank anymore. They are even encroaching into the river space, because I was told that they go get maram at night. They just pour on a section of the river, and somebody builds at night. But you wake up in the morning, when there's not much water, that is possible. But when the water comes back claiming its space, these people are swept. That's where you've seen kind of a catch-22 situation, where the government now is standing and trying to enforce really on the 30-meter space from rivers, which is going to save lives. And I mean, some of these people are people who do not have anywhere to go. So that's also another disaster. So if there was planning and people were very keen on ensuring that people do not build along the rivers, then we can be able to say that that process could have been averted. And it's not only in the rural, in the poor setups, because there was that aspect of discrimination. We saw the same thing happen in Runda. We didn't see anybody get evacuated or his house being pulled down, and these are people actually who have also built near rivers. However much it's an affluent neighborhood, so we need to have the law to apply to all. So those are some of the things. We have situations, these things started giving signs way back. Some 2-3 years back, we had the situation of Lake Nakuru, Lake Naivasha, the Rift Valley lakes, water rising and reclaiming their shores, and even some houses people had built, or even hotels which were near, were all now dysfunctional. I think there's one hotel in Bogori and Baringo, they're totally underwater. So when we saw those were clear signs that there's something happening which we need to pay attention to. There's also some new development about the fault lines in the Rift Valley. With these rains, we have seen Nakuru is almost dividing into two in some sections. Those are things which would be able, when they happen, we need to be very keen and ensure the leadership comes into place immediately, and then does what is called mitigation, or to avert a disaster. One time, I think the road at Narok was cut also. Of course, it was patched back, but then you see that's the same line all the way to Nakuru. So these things keep happening. And it's not only in Kenya, I think it's also happening in Ethiopia, all the way up to the places of Djibouti, everywhere where the Rift Valley is happening. So these are some of the things when we see, we need to be very careful about, and the government needs to be at the forefront to take data and warn people in advance that, people who are living here, you need to evacuate, because, your house is divided into two. What do? You either die or collapse in there.
I think it's a great concern that you've mentioned it, which begs the question whether in our laws, environmental laws, let alone the Climate Change Act, when it comes to penalties and consequences, are they so strict to the extent that we can avert some of these scenarios? Because the case of Maimahiu comes a few years after we had Solidum. So it then begs the question whether maybe there's some laxity, maybe the penalties are not strict enough to ensure adherence to the law.
It's not really about the penalties, because with laws we are good at coming up with them, Irene. The challenge is the enforcement, and the Kenyans being Kenyans. I mean, you imagine that, it's in the middle of Mayu, nobody knows this place. There's a dam here, it's another dam, nobody. So you guys continue living, nothing bad is going to happen. So such laxity and that kind of unconcerned enforcement is what leads to these disasters. There are also other disasters which are on a macro level, which really needs the government to take up the cue and be able to warn it. People like the thing of the cracking of the earth.
Yeah.
It's not really on our parent. It should be government to make a statement and warn people and do research along that fault line and be able to tell people, try to apply some caution here and even move them. And when you're telling somebody who has a substantive title that you got to move from your land because your land is sinking, then the next question they ask you, go where? Because I'm a purchaser, then you need to have options of evacuation. So we need to have our laws to accommodate such catastrophes that these people can be moved and be able to be taken to a safer place where they can be able to continue their lives unhindered. The same thing to the cyclones. I mean, if you have to evacuate a whole town in Kwale, then you got to have another alternative higher place where you have to move all these people in terms of tents, in terms of so that those are some of the safeguards which you cannot tell maybe a county you deal, or it's really government which has to come in and have very specific sector-specific policies so that we can be able to enforce, because we are seeing these things changing. The other thing I think I'd addressed a while back was the issue of the rains which had really disappeared for some time. Government through the adaptation fund can now be able to use even these funds to ensure the livestock which we lost, so that these people do not go home empty-handed. They can actually be given this money, now can be wired to their accounts and they can use it to buy food. So that those are some of the trade-offs or some of the alternatives which government should be. But for you to do this, you need to have data. How many people live in Waji? How many heads of cattle do they have? So you have to do a lot of sequencing. You need to know all the farmers, and this is a very has to be a very organized and collaborative effort. And so that because the kind of challenges we're going to face from here forward are things which we do not expect. So we need to anticipate the risks so that we can be able to cover them.
I know you said that looking into the country and when it comes to carbon footprint and other countries across the continent, we are not that badly off. But then we can't ignore the fact that we have businesses, we have industries that have huge magnitude of carbon emissions. Do we have mechanisms to ensure that these companies look into their surrounding to ensure that the communities surrounding there are protected?
Yes, I think that's a very interesting question, but that discussion cannot only be based around climate change. It has to be based on holistically. How do we have, when you set up an industry in a locality, what are some of the things, because we have seen a lot of cases. I mean, we have seen, I think, Mara Sugar in Kilgoris. There was an episode which was done on now. Even the schools around, I mean, you air your clothes outside. There's a lot of smog, and they are even affecting the kids. In some other places, we have seen the enforcement in Mombasa, where somebody did a metal smelting factory within a local setup for poor people, and there was lead. Some of the after effects were that they were emitting some of the effluent into the rivers, which were affecting even kids, and that was one of the major enforcement cases we have had, because then there was monetary value. And if you asked earlier a question about whether the fines are not big, our law is very enabling. So going by that, you could be able to see the amount of money which was levied on the government, because majorly the government is the key person with the mantle. The constitution mandates the government to ensure that there's a clean and healthy environment. So that is not a responsibility of the factory. It's the government to ensure that it comes up with policies and laws to ensure that these people do not do this. if the laws are there, then it's still for the government to ensure that they apprehend these people if they violate the laws. So in anywhere where the government drops the ball anywhere, people suffer, people die, people end up having diseases. So that is what we are saying, that government needs to put its foot down to ensure that it really does enough compliance. Okay. The other case I will want to raise on enforcement is we had a case where we wanted to set up a coal plant somewhere in Lamu. Yeah, and I mean, I attended a couple of those discussions, and I mean, luckily enough, I mean, the case was stopped, and you see that was a multi-billion project, which was in the Vision 2030. So if you can be able to stop government based on the laws we have, it means our laws don't have a problem. Yeah. It's really the enforcement and following through. So those are some of the things which and some of these things you cannot do them elsewhere in other African countries. Okay. There are worse things happening in this continent. I mean, our neighboring countries, there are cases of the West, they do their nuclear plants and they come and dump those effluents in your land, and with the blessing of the government. So I think if we need to stand up for Africans, we also need to actually start educating, because the environment is homogeneous. So you might think that has been done in Somalia. Those things, the water underground does not know a country. Does not know that there's a boundary up here, now we are crossing into Kenya. So that water still might end up to our people using it in one way or another. People will go there and do business and take the same water, and then they will be affected. So it's something which we need to talk about holistically and ensure that right around the world, nobody is doing anything which affects the environment, because you touch the environment, you touch the humanity.
As we wind up the discussion because of time, what are the key priorities that Kenya should put their best foot forward when it comes to global discussions surrounding climate change? Because the president is very vocal, but the question is, what is it in for us as a country?
There's a lot of money. I can assure you that there's a lot of money in terms of money for adaptation and mitigation. So those two things, the adaptation bit, people are not talking about it. So it's only mitigation. But mitigation comes in after the effect. But we need to do adaptation so that we are compliant, so that when these things happen, we are already ready. So we need to also have money for that, so that we have a discussion. And you will be surprised, in this country, people are very wise. People have already mapped all the forests. People have mapped all the plantation, the sugar plantation, the coffee plantation. You know, those are carbon sink areas, and the only thing and some people are cashing in the money. But now the big money which should be channeled through government is what really we have not seen come in a big way. But in Kenya, as we have said, Kenya and South Africa have actually been able in the forefront in terms of receiving of these funds. What we need to see, as you have asked, what is in there for us, is we need to see more of these funds come, because the adverse effects, we have seen them. We need now money in the magnitude of the floods. The money needs to come in flooding the way the floods, because that is the only way we can be able to avert some of these things. And I think we need to hope that our president succeeds in that. It's not an easy discussion. The other thing which we need to do is I think that is not only for Kenya. When these discussions are being held in the foreign capitals, we need to invest in taking people who are knowledgeable about these things. Most interestingly, I can tell you the Nairobi Declaration, which was read, was not actually done by Kenyans. So, I mean, when you get somebody else from a foreign country, which you should be pushing for them to pay to do your laws, then it's unfortunate. So what we need to do is to train our people, negotiators, international climate negotiators. If we can be able to invest in our people, and I know a couple of friends who have done that, if they could be co-opted by government and be used to be the chief negotiators, and even environmental diplomatic negotiators, because that's what we need. That's what the West does. That's what the Asians do. It's only the Africans who don't. Some of these discussions are held in the deep of the night when Africans are deep asleep or they are touring the city and clubbing. So we need to also have some discipline and demand accountability of the people we send to these discussions. Because the only thing I understand they do is they show up on the last day when the accord is being signed. Then they ask, where are we signing? They just sign, but they do not participate through the discussions. So those are some of the things we also need to be wise so that we can be able to know how to engage the rest of the world and be able to deliver for our people. Because it's really what you asked about, what is in there for us. What is in there for us, we're going to be compensated for the harm we are suffering. So, but if you're not on the table to discuss the clear terms, then you'll be told, yeah, this is the much you just signed, this is the much we're going to give you, and that will be not sustainable.
All right. Thank you so much, Wakili, for giving us your input on what should be done in terms of climate change. It's quite a big discussion.
It's an expansive discussion.
You can't finish it within an hour, but thank you so much for that particular perspective.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Yes.
All right. All right, that has been Law Matters, talking about the issue of climate change, the effects, and what we should be doing as a country, not only in our country, but also in the global discussions. What should be our best foot forward in terms of discussions. My name is Irene Mwangi. Because of time, I'll wish you a splendid night.